In the Middle Ages, not every job was about fighting or farming. Some people worked in ways most of us wouldn't even try for 5 minutes. These jobs were messy, strange, and sometimes hard to believe, but they were real. Let's kick things off with one of the most putrid professions of the Middle Ages, the tanner. These brave souls transformed raw animal hides into leather using methods that would make your stomach turn. When an animal was slaughtered, tanners took the unwanted skins and began their foul work. How did they remove hair and flesh from the hides? By soaking everything in vats filled with urine. The medieval tanning industry was basically one giant toilet bowl with a business plan. Talk about a job where you were literally taking the piss. Towns collected urine in communal pots for tanners to use. In some places, special urine collectors would go door to door gathering this precious tanning fluid from households. If they ran short on urine, they'd substitute with dog or chicken poop. Medieval fashion was quite literally the product of craftsmanship. This disgusting process could last for months. Tanners would regularly stir these putrid vats with long poles, releasing clouds of eye-watering ammonia. The stench was so overpowering that medieval towns forced tanners to work downwind from everyone else. Laws required tanneries to be built on the edge of town, usually downstream so their waste wouldn't contaminate water that other trades needed. In some cities, tanners could only marry within their profession because nobody else could stand their smell. Their dating profile would have read, "Enjoys long walks by the cesspool and brings work home with him." Literally. The smell permanently embedded itself in their skin and clothes, making them instantly recognizable and avoidable in any crowd. Despite creating essential products, shoes, belts, armor straps, saddles, and more, tanners were paid terribly. A skilled tanner might spend a full year processing leather, earning barely enough to feed his family. It was the only job where your career quite literally stank, and so did your paycheck. The finished leather was incredibly durable, though. All that soaking in bodily waste actually created products that could last for decades. Many of the leather items preserved from the medieval period still maintain their strength and flexibility today, which is pretty impressive considering they're hundreds of years old. Speaking of jobs nobody wanted, at least tanners kept their feet on solid ground. Other medieval workers weren't so lucky, especially those who faced danger at dizzying heights. Have you ever wondered how those massive stone blocks got to the top of medieval cathedrals? Meet the treadmill crane operators, the unsung daredevils of medieval construction. These workers spent their days inside giant wooden wheels that looked like oversized hamster toys. The principle was simple. Humans walked inside these massive wooden treadmills to generate power, which then lifted heavy stones and building materials to dizzying heights. Medieval construction crews were basically using human-sized pet toys to build churches. Gym memberships were completely unnecessary back then. The treadmill cranes towered hundreds of feet in the air above cathedral construction sites. Unlike modern workers with safety harnesses and steel-toed boots, medieval crane operators had nothing. No safety equipment, no backup plans, just wooden platforms beneath their feet and the constant awareness that one slip meant certain death. A single treadmill could lift stones weighing up to 2,000 pounds. Sometimes multiple men would work inside a single wheel, coordinating their steps to maintain a steady lifting pace. One medieval record from Notre Dame Cathedral noted that 4 men working a treadmill could lift a 1-ton stone about 70 feet in just 10 minutes. Impressive efficiency considering they were basically just walking in place. The worst danger came from the wheel itself. The wooden mechanism had no brakes or safety stops. If a worker tripped or lost their footing while a heavy stone was being lifted, the wheel would spin backward at incredible speed. It was essentially a medieval version of being thrown into a washing machine. Except instead of getting clean, you'd get crushed. Limbs caught in the reversing wheel would be instantly mangled or severed. During winter, the job became even more treacherous. Wooden platforms would become slick with ice and snow, while the workers' frozen hands struggled to maintain their grip. Many cathedrals took decades to complete, which meant generations of wheel walkers climbed to those deadly heights day after day, year after year. Despite the crucial nature of their work, treadmill operators were among the lowest paid construction workers. Their dangerous efforts literally raised medieval cities toward the heavens, yet they received almost no recognition. While master masons and architects gained fame and fortune, the men who powered the actual lifting remained anonymous figures in history, from heights that would make most people dizzy to depths that would make anyone gag. The next job involves diving into the foulest pits in medieval society. What happened after medieval people used the toilet? Someone had to deal with that mess. Enter the Gong Farmer, possibly the worst-smelling job in history. Gong was actually an old word for waste or excrement, so these weren't farmers in the traditional sense, unless you count harvesting human poop as agriculture. Their crop was crap, and business was always booming. Gong farmers worked exclusively at night, from 9 in the evening until 5 in the morning. Medieval towns simply didn't want to see or smell these workers during daylight hours when people were trying to eat or conduct business. Their task? To climb down into cesspits and latrines beneath medieval towns and scoop out human waste. With no indoor plumbing, medieval toilets were typically holes that dropped waste into pits below. Armed with shovels and buckets, Gong farmers would descend into these foul chambers and manually remove the contents. The dangers were numerous. Many died from falling into deep cesspits and drowning in excrement. Others succumbed to asphyxiation from methane gas. Disease was constant, with no protection except perhaps a rag tied over the face. Surprisingly, Gong farmers were well paid. In 16th century England, they earned 6 pence per ton of waste removed, about what a skilled craftsman might make in an entire week. When your job literally stinks, at least the pay shouldn't. The collected waste would be carted to dumping grounds outside city walls or sold to farmers as fertilizer. Despite their crucial role in keeping medieval cities from drowning in their own filth, Gong farmers were social outcasts who lived in segregated areas and even sat apart in church. While Gong farmers dealt with the waste of the living, other medieval workers had to handle those who'd left this world. Life was harsh in medieval times, and someone had to carry out justice's darkest sentences. The executioner stood ready with an axe, rope, or hot iron in hand, delivering society's final punishment to criminals. Unlike today's anonymous prison workers, medieval executioners were well known, yet universally avoided. The job came with a strange mix of legal protection and social rejection. Executioners couldn't be charged with murder for their official duties. They were the only people who could kill someone in public and get thanked instead of arrested. But this legal protection came at a steep social cost. Most executioners lived on the edge of town in isolated homes marked with red paint or special symbols. They wore distinctive clothing like bright red hoods or gloves, making them instantly recognizable and avoidable wherever they went. Their work went far beyond simple hangings. Medieval executioners were skilled in multiple forms of death and torture, from quick beheadings to drawn-out punishments designed to cause maximum suffering. They needed to understand anatomy well enough to break someone on the wheel without killing them too quickly or to remove a hand without causing fatal blood loss. Being an executioner was often a family business passed down through generations. Children of executioners typically couldn't attend regular schools or marry outside their caste. Talk about bringing your work home. Dinner conversation at an executioner's house must have been absolutely killer. Due to their outcast status, executioners often took on additional unsavory tasks that no one else wanted. They might remove dead animal carcasses from streets, clean the town gallows, or collect taxes from lepers and prostitutes. In some towns, they even doubled as gong farmers during busy periods. While feared by most, executioners were sometimes sought out as healers. People believed that an executioner's touch had magical healing properties. Some executioners sold pieces of the rope used in hangings as good luck charms or medicine. Medieval folk would literally buy something from the same guy who just chopped off their neighbor's head. From delivering death as punishment to collecting creatures that delivered life-saving medicine, our next disgusting medieval job involved wading into cold ponds for slimy, blood-sucking creatures. Before modern medicine, bloodletting was all the rage. Doctors believed that removing bad blood could cure almost any ailment. Enter the Leech Collector, medieval medicine's unsung hero, who supplied these blood-hungry creatures to doctors across Europe. The job was simple in theory, but awful in practice. Leech collectors would wade barefoot into muddy ponds and swamps where leeches lived. The goal? To become bait. It was the only profession where success meant literally having the lifeblood sucked out of you. Talk about a job that really gets under your skin. Most collectors use their own legs as leech lures, walking slowly through shallow water until the parasites attach to their bare skin. Once a good number had latched on, they would carefully remove them and place them in containers filled with water. These workers were the original blood donors, except instead of a cookie and orange juice afterward, they got poverty and infections. The physical toll was immense. Constant blood loss led to weakness, anemia, and dizziness. The wounds from leech bites often became infected, and collectors developed open sores on their legs that never fully healed. Their dating prospects were pretty limited too. So what do you do for a living? Rarely went well when the answer was, I let swamp creatures feast on my blood. At the height of the bloodletting craze in the early 1800s, France alone was importing more than 40 million leeches per year. The demand was so high that natural leech populations were nearly wiped out in some areas of Europe. This scarcity drove prices up, making the profession briefly lucrative despite its obvious drawbacks. It was the medieval version of a startup bubble, just with more actual sucking. As difficult as dealing with blood-sucking creatures was, at least leech collectors generally worked with the living. Some medieval jobs required facing something far worse. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, someone had to collect and bury the mounting piles of corpses. Plague barriers took on this grim task, becoming the final handlers for victims of history's most devastating pandemic. Death carts rumbled through streets day and night, accompanied by the haunting call, "Bring out your dead." Plague barriers would go door to door, collecting bodies from homes where entire families had perished. They used long hooks to drag corpses from buildings without having to enter, though this grim method often resulted in bodies being badly damaged. Medieval social distancing was less about staying 6 feet apart and more about keeping 6 feet under. The risk was enormous. These workers had almost no protection from infection beyond a simple cloth mask soaked in vinegar or herbs, which they believed would filter out the bad air that spread disease. Many plague barriers were criminals given the choice between this deadly work or execution. Others were desperate peasants who had lost everything and saw this dangerous job as their only option for survival. In London alone, records suggest more than 100,000 people died during the worst outbreak of plague, roughly half the city's population. At the height of the pandemic, plague barriers could collect several hundred bodies per day from a single neighborhood. The sheer volume overwhelmed church graveyards, forcing the creation of massive plague pits outside city walls. These pits were nightmarish. Some were 40 feet deep and could hold thousands of bodies layered with lime to reduce the smell. In archaeological excavations of these sites, bodies are often found tossed in haphazardly, a stark contrast to the careful burials normally practiced in medieval times. If you think your job is soul-crushing, at least you're not literally surrounded by piles of corpses every workday. Initially, plague barriers attempted some semblance of funeral rites, saying brief prayers as they worked, but as death tolls mounted, even these minimal ceremonies disappeared. Bodies were simply dumped as quickly as possible before the barriers moved on to the next collection point. Many plague barriers received free alcohol to help them cope with the horror and mask the stench of decomposition. This led to stories of drunken burial teams dropping bodies in the streets or fighting over valuable items found on corpses. The workplace drinking policy was less, "It's 5 o'clock somewhere," and more, "Drink until you can't smell death anymore." The psychological toll was immeasurable. Plague barriers often became numb to the constant exposure to death, developing a dark humor that shocked their contemporaries. Many died from the plague themselves, while survivors were permanently marked by their experiences, sometimes literally, as communities would brand or tattoo plague workers to identify them even after the epidemic passed. While plague barriers dealt with the dead, other medieval workers had to endure some truly foul working conditions. Laundry was a team sport in medieval times. You brought the cloth. They brought the bodily fluids. Fullers were essential workers who turned rough, freshly woven wool into usable fabric, using methods that would make modern dry cleaners quit on the spot. The fulling process was crucial for wool fabric. Raw wool straight from the loom was loose, oily, and unwearable. To make it suitable for clothing, it needed to be fulled, a process that cleaned, thickened, and strengthened the material. And how did medieval fullers accomplish this vital textile transformation? With a disgusting combination of human urine, clay, and vigorous stomping. First, fullers collected urine. Lots of it. Fresh urine wouldn't do. They needed the stale stuff that had broken down into ammonia. In medieval towns, fullers would leave collection pots on street corners where men would relieve themselves after a night at the tavern. It gives a whole new meaning to community contribution. In some places, fullers collected household urine in jars that were left on the street specifically for this purpose, sometimes paying a small fee for particularly well-fermented batches. Once enough urine was gathered, fullers would pour it into large wooden vats along with the raw wool cloth. Then came the truly revolting part. Workers would climb into these vats barefoot and begin stomping on the fabric, often for hours at a time. The ammonia in the urine would break down grease and oils in the wool, while the stomping action matted the fibers together, creating a denser, stronger material. The fuller's life was a stinking one. They spent their days ankle-deep in human waste, performing exhausting physical labor. The ammonia fumes caused eye and lung irritation, while prolonged exposure to urine led to foot infections and skin problems. You could always identify a fuller by their distinctive walk, a combination of chemical burns and the permanent stench that kept everyone at a distance. In larger textile towns, fulling mills eventually developed, where wooden hammers powered by water wheels would pound the fabric instead of human feet. But human-powered fulling remained common in many places until the late medieval period. Records from Florence, Italy, show that in the early 14th century, the city had over 200 fulling workshops employing thousands of workers, all processing wool in urine vats. After stomping, the cloth would be rinsed in water and stretched on large wooden frames called tenters, which gave us the phrase on tenterhooks. Fullers would use sharp hooks to stretch the cloth evenly as it dried, ensuring the final product was smooth and uniform. The profession was so important that Fuller became a common surname that still exists today. If your last name is Fuller, congratulations. Your ancestors likely spent their days stomping around in medieval pee pools. That's something to share at family reunions. While fullers used plenty of urine in their work, they didn't always collect it themselves. There was an even more unpleasant profession dedicated solely to gathering this valuable medieval resource. Enter the urine collector, a medieval professional with possibly the least appealing container in history. These brave souls walked town streets gathering human waste liquid from homes and public collection pots. Medieval people didn't use fancy terminology. These workers were bluntly called piss collectors. When your job title makes small children giggle and adults cringe, you know you've reached a special level of career achievement. Their daily routine involved carrying heavy, sloshing buckets through narrow, filthy streets full of obstacles. One wrong step on uneven cobblestones could mean disaster. A spill that would ruin your day, your clothes, and any chance of being welcome in public places for weeks. The collectors delivered their aromatic harvests to tanners, cloth fullers, and dyers who relied on urine's ammonia for breaking down materials. They were essentially medieval recycling workers, just with a product nobody wanted to acknowledge producing. Urine was surprisingly valuable in the medieval economy. Professional collectors could earn decent wages, especially in major textile towns with high demand. Some town records show urine collectors making more than common laborers, proving that handling disgusting materials could literally pay off. However, their pay came with obvious social costs. Collectors were avoided by most townspeople and typically lived in isolated areas. They were the original essential workers, absolutely necessary for industries to function, yet people only wanted to see them when they needed something. While urine collectors dealt with one bodily fluid, other medieval workers faced even more dangerous encounters with creatures that actively tried to bite, scratch, and infect them. These were the original exterminators, just less gloves, more teeth. Rat catchers handled medieval Europe's relentless rodent problem using methods that would make modern health inspectors faint. Rats thrived in medieval cities. Poor sanitation, open sewers, and accessible food storage created a rat paradise. When infestations threatened to destroy a family's winter food supply or spread disease, desperate towns would hire rat catchers. Most rat catchers used their bare hands, small clubs, or nets to capture rodents. Some used trained dogs or ferrets to flush rats from hiding places. Payment often depended on producing evidence of kills, so rat catchers would cut off the tails as proof. Some dishonest rat catchers ran scams by releasing pregnant females back into buildings, ensuring future employment. It was the medieval version of job security. Breed your own customers. The health risks were enormous. Rat bites frequently became infected, and fleas jumping from rats to humans spread bubonic plague. They were essentially playing a deadly game of tag with the Grim Reaper every workday. In a cruel twist of fate, rat catchers were often blamed for the very plague outbreaks they were fighting against. Their contact with infected areas made them appear to be carriers themselves. From dealing with live vermin to pulling bad teeth, our next disgusting profession combined healthcare and dental in ways that would horrify modern medical professionals. Need a tooth pulled in medieval times? You weren't headed to a trained dentist, just someone with pliers and a strong stomach. Tooth drawers were the brave or foolish souls who handled medieval dental emergencies with tools that would make modern dentists faint. These practitioners had no formal training or education, just a set of crude metal pliers and perhaps a knife. Medieval dental school consisted entirely of watching someone else yank teeth, then saying, "I can do that," while desperately needing the money. When toothaches became unbearable, people would seek out these tooth drawers, who often worked in markets alongside other tradespeople. The procedure was brutally simple. Grip the offending tooth with pliers and pull with all your might. No anesthetic, no sterilization, and frequently no success on the first attempt. Some tooth drawers would offer alcohol to dull the pain, but many couldn't afford even this basic courtesy. The medieval equivalent of "this won't hurt a bit" was "try not to bite my fingers off while you're screaming." Infections were common. Broken teeth, damaged gums, and jaw injuries were standard outcomes. Many patients developed life-threatening abscesses after these crude extractions. The lucky ones merely lost more teeth than intended. To distract from the pain and attract customers, some tooth drawers became entertainers. They would perform extractions in public while telling jokes or singing songs, turning dental agony into a bizarre form of street theater. It was the medieval version of dinner and a show, except the dinner was blood and the show was your neighbor's anguish. From tanners to tooth drawers, the disgusting jobs of medieval times remind us how far we've come. Modern work might be stressful, but at least it doesn't involve standing ankle-deep in urine, blood, or someone else's extracted molars.